Howdy, Space Geeks. Are you liking this podcast so far? Well, there are two ways to show your support. One, you can add a review of this show on iTunes. That's how more people find out about the program. And two, you can consider making a gift of financial support to WMFE. And you can do that by visiting wmfe.org/support. Your gift helps us better explore exploration. Now, let's turn to space. From the studios at WMFE in Orlando, Florida, this is the Space Exploration Podcast that asks the question, are we there yet? Hi, I'm Brendan Byrne. You know, on this podcast, we've been focusing a lot on the technology of space exploration. We talk to rocket engineers, various scientists, designers, but the ultimate goal of Martian exploration is to colonize the planet. And while all this technology is imperative in getting humans to Mars, there's one aspect of this ambition we really haven't talked about yet, and that's the first humans that are going to Mars. Well, my next guest might be one of those Martian colonists. Mars One is a global nonprofit with the goal of sending the first group of colonists to the Red Planet in the 2020s. Now, George Hatcher is one of the final 100 candidates being considered for the first core of astronauts heading to Mars forever. George, thanks for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, George, in your own words, just kind of tell me what Mars One is.
Mars One is a nonprofit organization that seeks to establish the first human settlement on the surface of Mars. And this is an international effort by design. Applications were taken from all over the world, from anyone over the age of 18 who sought to travel to Mars and spend the rest of their life there.
What prompted you to apply for this?
Astronaut opportunities are very rare, and this has been a goal of mine since about age 3. So I have my third application in with the NASA Astronaut Corps as of right now, and this is the only other game in town as far as trying to get a ride to space.
Now, there must have been thousands of applicants that applied for this, and you've made it to one of the final rounds here. Kind of tell me about the selection process and what you think Mars One was looking for and why they might have selected you.
The selection process has proceeded in rounds, and the beginning was anyone who was interested in putting together an online application that included a short video, about 90 seconds, talking about why you wanted to go and a little bit about who you were. And then it's progressed to internet interviews based on material that they provided for you to study, so they could take from this large amount of data and ask you specific questions about their mission architecture or about the environment in Mars specifically. The requirements for Mars One astronauts are somewhat different than the requirements that NASA is looking for. NASA focuses a lot on credentials and experience, and Mars One focuses on much softer skills. They want people who have the psychological fortitude to permanently abandon the Earth. They want people who focus much more on their ability to collaborate and work in teams than their ability to lead or to respond to typical hierarchical social structures. They want people who are adaptable and self-sufficient, who can basically make do with adverse circumstances, and really people who are willing to face larger than normal degree of danger. So it really comes down to an entirely different skill set than what NASA's looking for. So I've tried to model my career and my education and my experience on things that would appeal to NASA's selection committee. And this was an opportunity to kind of apply to a program that sought a more well-rounded candidate in terms of, I want to say, your ability to collaborate. And it's not that astronauts don't work well in teams. In fact, that's also a prerequisite for working and living on the International Space Station. Just that this is a bit more of an extreme undertaking when you consider that there's no return to Earth.
Yeah, you kind of glossed over that at the start of that answer. You have to have the mindset that you're permanently going to leave Earth. How do you get that, and how do you measure that on an application?
That is very difficult to do on paper, which is why round 3 for Mars One is going to include all the remaining 100 candidates traveling to one location and participating in team exercises that really try to evaluate, using known techniques, with a person that has done this sort of evaluation for NASA and ESA and JAXA, trying to evaluate their ability to work in teams. And the later parts of the selection will actually put people in confinement with these other candidates for a certain amount of time to see how they respond to it. Now, a few days is going to be a lot different than the rest of your life, but at least you can very quickly weed out people who can't sustain any sort of confinement.
And you're okay with that? You're okay with leaving the Earth for good and living the rest of your life on Mars?
It's something that I'm willing to do because of the way that I conceive of sacrifice. And for me, sacrifice is giving up something that's lower for something that's higher, or doing something that is beneficial to a large number of people and taking a hit for your own personal satisfaction. So I see it as a sacrifice that I'm willing to do because of my dedication to space exploration, and because part of my identity is to try to contribute to humanity and to an ever-advancing civilization. A lot of the answers that I've given to this question in the past really have to delve a little bit into my religious beliefs, but it really comes down to seeing this body as a tool and seeing this life as part of a bigger whole, so that it's something where I consider a single human lifespan in the context of spirituality and also in the context of the age of the universe as to be a very short blip. And so even another 40 years on another planet, isolated from this paradise planet that we call Earth, would be something that I'd be willing to undertake if it meant that I was improving humanity's long-term chances of survival by exploring what it takes to live outside of Earth.
With such a sacrifice like that, what are you hoping humanity can learn from you going to Mars and sacrificing yourself for, as you say, for space exploration?
One of the big things would be, what are the limits of the human body in terms of the gravitational field that we require? Because we've evolved in 1G, we know that microgravity has many deleterious health effects, whether it's visual degradation, loss of muscle mass, loss of bone density. There are a lot of questions about whether or not a fetus could properly develop without a 1G gravity field. So is Mars at 3/8 Earth's gravity enough to sustain human health long term? People talk a lot about the radiation en route to Mars and the radiation on the surface, and different mitigation technologies for that. The limits that NASA establishes that are kind of, the global limits that a lot of people tend to follow are extremely conservative. They're looking for no more than a 3% increase in the lifelong risk of cancer. So given that that's less than what you might expect from behaviors that we take for granted, like smoking or a lot of airline flights where you're exposed to a slightly higher level of radiation in the upper atmosphere, or any number of things where we consume things for our pleasure that are not necessarily healthy for our bodies, I'm willing to take on a risk of cancer that's higher than 3%, and living in the radiation environment of Mars or exploring radiation shielding technologies on the surface there, in addition to ways of living off the land on Mars so we don't have to spend so much money sending all the supplies from Earth to get out of Earth's gravity well. So developing resources like water and oxygen and raw materials on the surface of Mars, I think that's going to enable just an explosion of humanity into the solar system and hopefully eventually beyond. But establishing those technologies and those techniques and determining what are the boundaries, what are the limits for what humans can do, really will help us get out there and start exploring, learning things that we don't even know that we don't know, and really exploiting almost limitless resources that the universe has to supply.
So, George, if you're one of these 100 that are selected for one of the first two missions here, walk me through it. What's that first mission to Mars going to be like for either astronauts like yourself or other Mars One core astronauts?
Well, the 100 candidates that remain right now will be down selected to no more than 24. and from those 24, 4 will be selected for the first mission. It'll be 2 men and 2 women, and hopefully it'll be representatives from 4 different countries. That mission will travel to Mars and meet up with a settlement that has already been established through several flights that have been robotically piloted. So they will arrive to living space, and they'll immediately undertake making sure that everything is nominal, that they can move in and begin living and working in a shirt-sleeve environment, and expanding that space to get ready for the next crew, which will arrive about 26 months after they arrived. So the first few stages, the first few missions are very much about expanding living quarters and paving the way for future settlers. But long term, you really want to explore the surface. You want to get out and do some geology. You'll do some prospecting to search for things that you need to continue your own survival, and hopefully eventually start addressing some scientific questions about the possibility of any extant life on Mars, looking for evidence of ancient life, and really helping to put together this picture of, can life arise on places other than Earth? And if so, how was life different on Mars?
What about laws and rules? Are you going to write a Martian constitution when you get there?
That's the idea. Mars One is being very flexible in terms of the way that they allow settlers to self-organize. So they're taking a hands-off approach, and they're allowing the people who live there to determine how to self-govern.
Huh, that's interesting. So you should send you're going to be founding fathers when you get there, right?
Founding fathers and mothers. Hopefully it will be an opportunity to take everything that we've learned so far from all the different attempts at government that we've made and all the history that we've had, and to start fresh and say, in this harsh environment, what's the best way that we can collaborate and coexist?
Man, that is fascinating.
It's exciting to me, even though there's a lot of deprivation. It's exciting for a lot of reasons.
You kind of spoke about this earlier, but those first few missions, they're going to send you supplies like food and water and stuff like that. What's the plan to kind of start cultivating your own food source there?
Mars One is very serious about long-term sustainability, and so that's definitely going to involve growing your own food. Now, given what we know about producing animals for food on Earth, just how energy intensive it is, how much land and water and plants that it requires, I don't see Martian settlers producing meat outside of perhaps cultured meat in the lab for a long time, because animals are very resource intensive. So I think that they're going to attempt to put together a diet that is fully sustaining and able to provide a human with all required nutrients from plants that are grown in greenhouses in pressurized, protected environments on the surface. Now, that's definitely a long-term goal. Anybody who has looked at mission architectures understands that that's not something that you can do from the beginning, especially because you're going to be pioneering a lot of techniques. So it will hopefully be a diet that's provided from stuff shipped from Earth, that's supplemented by things that you grow, and you gradually ramp up your capacity to grow your own food. And
you kind of brushed upon this question before, but really one of the long-term, or one of the big scientific questions is if you can establish a long-term colony there by reproduction. And right now we don't know if that's even possible. Can you kind of talk about what the long-term vision is from Mars One about looking at that question, and if you can actually, have babies on Mars?
When you go to the Mars One website, they, I think, kind of take a step back from this question because it's something that would be so much further down the line. There are definitely ethical considerations about bringing a child into the solar system not on the surface of the Earth, when there are so many unknowns about that child's health and their potential for survival and their potential for reaching adulthood. So really, I think that at least for the first stages, when you're having dozens of settlers on the surface of Mars, that you're not going to encourage those settlers to attempt to procreate. And I think there might be a lot of medical and physiological testing of individual Martian settlers to determine if it's something that we want to pursue, if it's even a good idea. So long term, I don't think Mars One takes a position on that. I think that their vision that extends decades into the future depends upon continuing to send adults from Earth. But it is an open question, and I think it's something that humanity will one day have to answer, and perhaps Mars One will be one of the organizations that contributes to that answer. What is the gravitational limit beyond which you don't want to go for human gestation?
You know, you spoke about this before, this being a one-way trip, and you understand that, and you know that it's a sacrifice that you're making for humanity here. But if you are selected, if you do go on that mission, what are you going to miss most about home?
I'm going to miss everything. It's easy to say that you're willing to do something like this. It's difficult to fully comprehend just what you're leaving behind. And the very first thing that springs to mind for me is my children and my wife, my extended family, my close friends, and the people that I love that are scattered across the world. So having a physical connection with those people, being able to be present in the same room with them, is something that's not to be underestimated. And beyond that, nature, the biosphere, what we take for granted every day. I don't expect Martian settlers to ever, in the first few decades, be able to dream of sitting under a shade tree or taking a swim in a natural body of water or even an artificial pool. To explore places where you don't have to have a life support strapped to you, so that taking a deep breath of air that's provided by an existing atmosphere, traveling to new countries where millions of people live, and seeing new cities that have been established hundreds or thousands of years ago that you've never visited. You'll be able to experience microcosms of those things through your fellow settlers. But I think that there's going to be a pretty strong and persistent longing for home, because Earth has things that are not duplicated anywhere else in the universe.
How do your wife and kids feel about this? Are they supporting you?
Well, my kids are very young. I have a 4-year-old. Our daughter's going to turn 2 next month, and we have a baby due in January. So this is not something that I've even spoken to them about. I do talk to my son, my 4-year-old son, a lot about his interests, and he loves rockets because we live on the Space Coast, and he gets to see them all the time. He knows that I work for NASA, and he knows that I work on rockets. But given the fact that I haven't even been selected by Mars One yet, it's not something that I've broached with him, and I'm not sure that I want to even tell him that there's a potential that Dad could leave the Earth forever. But he does ask a lot of questions about death, and so we're already discussing that topic. And as far as my wife goes, I discussed my desire to be an astronaut with her well before we got married. And even before Mars One existed, I knew of the concept of one-way missions. So I asked her if that was something that she would allow me to do, if the opportunity ever arose, not thinking that it would arise because I knew it was probably not something NASA was going to do based on public reaction. But she said, yeah, this is your dream. This is something that I would support you in if we got married. I'd just like to have kids first.
George Hatcher is a candidate to join the Mars One crew, which heads to the Red Planet. George, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Support for Are We There Yet comes from the listeners of WMFE. You can follow the show online. We're on Twitter at AWTYMars, or reach out to me in the Twitterverse. I'm at SpaceBrendan. Are We There Yet is a production of WMFE, and our theme music was composed by Kevin McLeod. You can find more space news online at WMFE.org/space. I'm Brendan Byrne. Thanks for listening.